Yes, the silence is telling. Okay. So we're here to talk about how to build your own IT vending machine. And I'm going to actually go through and actually talk about the RightScale API some, and then actually how I built an IT vending machine using the RightScale API. So some interesting stuff. If you guys have questions throughout, don't hesitate to raise your hand, and I'll try to take questions as they come. There'll also be time at the end for questions. So I wanted to first actually start out by asking a question. How many of you here have recently bought a car, or maybe going through the process of buying a car, at least familiar with the process? Okay, so there's kind of a couple of different approaches to that, right? And my wife and I actually argue about this a lot. She just wants something that she can get in, turn the key, drive. It's got 4 seats, 4 seat belts, 4 doors, fairly simple requirements, right? Myself personally, the first thing that I usually do when I go to buy a car is research all the aftermarket parts that I can get for it. What kind of wheels am I going to put on it? What kind of suspension is there that I can put on this thing, right? These are all the things that I think about. So what I want to try to do as we're going through this presentation is actually kind of draw that same sort of contrast. The RightScale API gives you the ability to have a really powerful integration, but it's also very simple. So it's kind of like that car buying experience. You have the push button, it goes, it works, you don't worry about what's under the hood, but you also have the ability to kind of dig into it and be able to do more interesting things. So it's a fairly simple agenda. We've got 3 items. I'm going to talk about how the RightScale API is powerful. I'm going to tell you about how it's simple. And then I'm going to show you a quick demo of the vending machine that I built using the API. I have actually not 1 but 2 live demos I want to give today, so I'm going to give you the maximum possible opportunity for things to go horribly wrong. We'll see how it goes. So again, what I want you guys to kind of take away from this is that the RightScale API is powerful and it's simple to use. So the first thing we're going to cover is how it's powerful. And I kind of told you the analogy of shopping for cars. This is what I look at when I go to buy a car, right? Don't really care what the parts are going on most of the time. It's what I can actually buy and do to tune the car. And the RightScale API is the same way. I'm going to kind of introduce the concept of the RightScale API and what we have. Super powerful. It's designed to be a common interface and a common abstraction for all of the clouds that we support. So it's RESTful, so it's familiar. It's not SOAP-based. We've actually made the right decision there. It's versioned, so if we introduce breaking changes, we'll version it. You'll be able to call the older API by specifying a header. So we're mindful of that as well. The response can be either JSON or XML, so whatever your particular programming language has a library for consuming more easily, you have your choice of that as well. And we're pretty flexible about how you authorize or authenticate with it as well. You can use just simple HTTP authentication, basic authentication with the username password, or you can use OAuth 2, where we actually specify a token in the dashboard. And then we also, in the API, and I'll show you a quick example of this, I think. I think I have slides for that. We can do filters. So you can query a particular media type or a particular thing that is represented in the RightScale API or in the dashboard and filter it based on its name, its location, the cloud that you're looking for, things of that nature. You also have the ability to get more or less data when you're viewing things, when you're selecting them or getting indexes of them by specifying views. So it might be that you just want a list of all of the hrefs for a particular object. There's a tiny view for that, which will send back just those hrefs and not the whole bit of data. And then, of course, I mentioned it already, but we have media types, which are basically representations of each one of the resources that are in the RightScale dashboard and in the API. So things like servers and deployments and instances are things that you'll actually see as media types. And they come back with annotations that tell you that this resource has these actions. That's actually on the next slide, which I'll show you. And this resource is related to these other resources using these hrefs. So very, very descriptive. It shows you kind of how the object model works. It's very useful in that way. We have extensive documentation and examples. There's a Ruby client, which I'll also show you. That's the first demo, the first opportunity for something to go horribly wrong. So this is the example of the media types that we have. So when you make a query, what comes back is obviously all the attributes for that particular object. So in this case, we are looking at an instance. And there's just some very simple state information, right? The name of the server, the current state that it's in, and then you can see the links there in the second bit of the XML response there. It has its own href itself. It has an href to the deployment that instance is part of, right? And then it's also got a link to the server template that instance was launched from. So you have all that information, and you can actually go and follow those links, get another media type response that looks like this for the server template, for instance, to find out that this is, in fact, a database server, and it has a certain list of scripts and so forth. And then it also lists the 2 actions that are possible for it at this point in time. So you can either terminate it or run an executable. If this were a stopped instance, it would actually have listed as actions the ability to launch the instance, be able to find the next instance, those sorts of things. So that actually changes based on the state of the media type that you're getting back. I wanted to kind of go and show the power a little bit in terms of an actual example that our ops team uses. And this is kind of an abbreviated version of the script that they run to roll out a new version of application code to all of our instances that are running for a particular deployment or for a particular part of our infrastructure. And so the first thing we do is we actually make a quick query where we find all of the servers that we're going to update based on a specific tag. So this is going to be finding it by a particular service. Maybe this is our tag service, or it's our global multi-cloud marketplace service, or maybe it's an authentication service. We use the tag to identify that. And we find that, then of course we iterate over each of them. And for each one of them, we then run a couple of operational scripts. The first one is the one that actually goes out and fetches the newest version of the application code for that particular server. We wait for that to happen, so we make sure that script completes successfully before we continue. And then if it is successful, then we actually go ahead and reboot the web server. So by doing this in this iterative way, we're actually waiting for the code to be downloaded, restarting the server, making sure it gets that new version of the application code and it's up and running. So, fairly short example, but it shows the power of what the RightScale API is able to do. You can automate any of these tasks. Anything that you would do in the RightScale dashboard, you can do through the API. You can automate these things. Ryan O'Leary and Raphael PH, who were up here before me, talked a little bit about Cloudflow. They'll have a talk about that tomorrow, Friday at 2:30. That is actually going to show you the tool that we're building. It's actually a custom DSL for doing these sorts of things in an even more terse way, and being able to do it from within the RightScale dashboard with that DSL, and giving you some tools for doing things concurrently and making sure that things complete in the correct order and so forth. So I encourage you to check that out as well. So we've talked a bit about how the RightScale API is powerful. So want to make sure that when you leave here, you remember that the RightScale API is powerful and it's simple. So we'll talk about the simple portion of it. So this is the get in the car, push the button, drive the car, right? So really, the way that this works, and part of the reason that this is so simple, the very first bit is that, I skipped a part, I think, which is that it's really well documented. And we have tools to make it even easier to consume, right? It's a RESTful API. People that are consuming APIs using service-oriented architectures are familiar with consuming REST APIs. God, not SOAP. And we've actually made it even easier by actually abstracting that a little bit further with a Ruby library. And I'll show that to you. The QR code actually takes you to the bit.ly link there, which is actually to the GitHub repository for that Ruby gem. It's also on Ruby gems, so you can grab it. It's what is it? Right API client. So right _ API _ client if you're looking just for the gem name. And it gives you kind of an abstraction for those media types and those resources. So when you get one of those back and you have an instance that has the ability to run an executable or to terminate, you can actually just do instance.terminate, and it'll make the necessary calls. So documentation. This is the part that I thought I skipped. So it's all very well documented. On our support portal, this is support.rightscale.com, we've got guides. And under guides, we've got all these ones. Specifically, we've got the RightScale API 1.5, which is the one that you're going to want to look at. And under there, we've got all sorts of really cool things, such as examples of how you're going to use that Ruby gem to do interesting things. So this is my first opportunity for something to go horribly wrong. And just to make sure that there's the maximum opportunity for that, why don't I have one of you guys pick one of these examples? I think anyone will be terse enough that we can do it in just a couple minutes. Anybody have a preference of which example I'm going to do? Deployments. All right. So let's click into deployments. And the cool thing about this, do you have a preference? I'd like to create one because it's easier. All right, so let's create a deployment. The cool thing about this, the bummer about this is that it doesn't have an example for the Right API client. So something has already gone horribly wrong. What we do have, though, are examples for curl and PowerShell. I'll show you how to do it with the Right API client because I'm just that good. I've got a terminal up here, and hopefully the text will be big enough. If we were back here, you could see how you would do it with curl. You'd actually first authenticate. And creating a deployment is pretty simple, right? We specify a name and a description, and we send it there. Same concept in PowerShell. So what I'm going to do is start up an interactive Ruby session here. Require Ruby gems. Require pretty print. Require Right API client. What's that? I don't. It's okay. I think it's already loaded Ruby gems when I ran IRB. So now I'm going to create an instance of the client. So Right API client.new. Email is my email. Geyer@rightscale.com. My password is carefully concealed in an environment variable so you can't see it. rspass. And then I'm going to specify the RightScale account that I'm going to use. So account ID 44134. All right, so this is successful. What I'll get is now a Right API client object that I can call. So if I want to create a new deployment, I'll do client.deployments.create, and then remember I have to specify at least a name. I can specify a name and a description. So name, RS Compute 2013, and description described, because I don't want to type a lot more than that. And I get an error. Sweet. I forgot to, it's deployment. And then the contents of that is a hash with a name and a description. So there we go. Now I can pretty print deployment.href. This is the new deployment that I just created. This is the name I assigned it. No route matches I need to show. That's the name I assigned it. This is the description, right? It's all real, I swear. And then in the dashboard, the RightScale dashboard, I can show you the deployment that's in there as well. So what did I name it? RS Compute. So there it is, RS Compute 2013, described. And then I can actually go ahead and nuke this because I don't want to keep it around. Destroy. We'll get a nil response, which is expected. And then I should be able to refresh my deployments here, go back to the second page. I swear, it's all real. And on slow internet too. So now it's gone, right? So you can see kind of how easy we make it, right? If you are not in front of a crowd and you kind of remember the commands, it's actually pretty easy to do any of these things using the Ruby gem. There's actually other libraries as well. I've personally written one in PHP, which is what the vending machine is based on, which I'll show you. Another colleague of mine who's actually speaking right now, Patrick McClory, has built one for PowerShell. There's Python ones out there. The one that we officially build and maintain is the Ruby library. Again, if your language of choice is not represented here, it's a RESTful API. It's really pretty easy to go ahead and build your own and make your own calls against it. So I'm going to switch back to slides for just a couple of slides. It's actually really quick, and then I'm going to go into my second demo. So remember, RightScale API is powerful, and it's simple, right? So what I'm going to do is show you the RightScale vending machine. If you guys read the title and that's what you're here for, I'm sorry I held out so long. But this is what I'm going to show you. What this actually is, I'll give you a little bit of history about it, is it is a PHP application. And I know there are probably some of you in the room who are cringing when I say PHP. I'm not a PHP guy. It was one of the languages that I learned early on, but I would actually much rather do this in Ruby. The reason I chose PHP is because RightScale is a Ruby shop, and we've got plenty of really cool stuff in Ruby. And guess what? There actually is an actual community out there that writes code in PHP. I kind of wanted to cater to that market and kind of open up the possibilities for them. So I could have done this in a lot less time if I'd chosen to do it in Ruby, but I kind of took the masochistic route and did it in PHP. So that's my summary. I'm not there yet. So let me show you this thing. So this is what it looks like. And actually, this is what each person would get initially. One of the things I realized pretty early on when I was creating this is that I'm going to need to make sure that people that access it are kind of authorized to access it. I'm just kind of throwing this out there for sales enablement purposes so our sales team can use it and so that we can use it for presentations like this. So I wanted to make sure that people needed to be authenticated for it. So I'm going to go ahead and log in first. Because we're a Google Apps shop, it was just really easy to use Google OpenID for authentication. I'm already an authenticated user, so I get in there. If you don't believe me, I actually can go back to the admin panel. Now would be an awesome time for it to not be responding. Ooh. Beach ball of doom. That would be great. Yeah, could you fill the dead air for me? So the great part is I actually, it's probably down. I actually am running this thing on a spot instance, and there's a very good chance I got outbid on my spot bid, and it went away. I kind of forgot. Well, I'm trying to save the company money. Come on, we talk about pricing. We've got Plowed for Cloud to make sure that we know what we're spending. I know. You're much cooler than I am, Kent. All right, I hopefully have another one that I can show you. Okay, pay no attention to the fact that this is a completely different one. So it really does authenticate users. I'm the only person who is authenticated to use this. I won't remove myself because that could potentially cause even more problems. It would delay us even further. But I can actually control who can be in here and who can't. Has a little bit of, a simple UI for showing the what I'm calling products, the clickable things, the things you can vend from this. So I've got a base and a PHP 3 tier. Can do some interesting stuff like changing its name, deciding whether or not it launches the servers, set the ginormous send logo. Yeah, there you go, Kent. Or any of these other logos for what you're actually going to run, right? And you can upload additional. I'll hopefully get to show you what that means here in a minute. And then it doesn't have anything in there provisioned yet. So what this is really doing, before I kind of dig into all the features and stuff some more, which all of the features, you've seen them all. It's very simple. The goal of this is that I've got a definition of what a PHP 3 tier looks like, right? I've got 2 load balancers, I've got a master and a slave database, I've got a couple of application servers. It uses specific server templates in RightScale. I know that certain inputs are required in order to set that thing up. For an end user, for someone who's maybe a developer, maybe someone who's in the marketing department and wants to try out a new website or a new initiative, they don't need to know all the complexity of what it takes to stand up a 3-tier. They don't need to know about server templates. They don't need to know about all that stuff, right? What they need to know is, I want a PHP 3-tier, right? So what this allows you to do is basically just click on this thing, and it's actually configurable, the questions that it will ask you, the things that it'll ask for. So I can have it ask for a deployment name. So we'll do... By the way, RSSS is the acronym I've given this for RightScale Self-Service. It's really spectacular. 2013, we can set the array voting tag if we want to. I'll leave that alone. And then we can pick the cloud. So this is connected to an account, a RightScale account that has these cloud credentials added to it, right? So we can pick whichever one we like here. Let's do Rackspace. So what it's doing now is it's taking that definition, which is actually stored in the database of the vending machine, sort of all this metadata about what it takes to set up a 3-tier, and it's making all the necessary calls. It's making that deployment create call that I showed you on the command line. It's doing server create calls to create the servers with the specific server templates. It's actually checking to see if those server templates are part of the RightScale account or not, and if they aren't, it imports them. Creates all the necessary security groups, creates SSH keys, again, if the cloud supports them. Does kind of a lot of magic that just is abstracted from the user because they really don't need to know about that. You care about it as the ops guy, as the person that's actually going to end up supporting this, but users really don't care. So what we should see, usually takes, about 30, 40 seconds, is a provision product, right? And this thing actually has an admin panel. The idea is, the use case is, users will authenticate to this thing and use it, and they may not even know that RightScale is on the back end. I'm actually using a single service account that's a RightScale account that has credentials and can make all these calls. And these are the servers, right? And they're all not running right now. And I can start them, right? So I can click on this, and I can start up a server, and then, start these up. I can stop them as a user. Kind of have a very limited amount of control over what I can do because I'm just a dumb end user, and I don't want to be messing with all this stuff, right? So now that actually shows up as this list of provision products. Now, the other thing that I realized very early on is if I make it this easy for people to provision stuff, guess what? They're going to. So I needed to also make it really easy for me to delete stuff because the first few people I gave it to, Bailey's one of them right down there, would go and click and show this to people, and I'd end up with like 30 deployments in there and a bunch of servers running. And unless I was keeping track of it, it was really hard to clean all that stuff up. Because remember, it creates separate security groups and SSH keys and all that stuff for each one of these things. So I can delete these. The message I should get is that since I just started up that one server, it's in the process of launching. So hey, there's actually one server running. I sent a terminate request. Come back and try that again later. So we'll do that. Let me take a look at my to-do list here. So what I want to show you, this is the product and project that I've been working on. And I promised that I would hopefully be able to show you why the Futurama icon was in there. Oh man, let's see here. Sweet, that one's back up. Don't know why. It's handy though, because this is the one that has this extra little bit. So what this is another project that's actually was developed by another engineer who's unfortunately not here. He's still back in Santa Barbara holding down the fort, called RightScale Integrated Deployment Environment. And the idea is to be able to kind of graphically build an environment. Now, mind you, my stuff's like, super rough beta. This is like alpha. So my stuff's out there as open source. This may eventually make it there, but if you want to see more of Ride, you can talk to me after the session. But what this is, we'll create a new product called RS Compute. I'm really boring. What we can do is actually graphically create a deployment. So let's throw a load balancer in there. We need one of those. And again, just to prove that this is really legitimately something that I haven't pre-scripted, how about we choose what database technology we're going to use, MySQL or Postgres? Postgres, all right. Let's grab one of those. And application server technology from these guys. Django. I know it's in there. There we are. Okay. So we've got one of each. We're going to connect them up. The load balancer talks to the app server. The app server talks to the database server. And what's sort of happening in the background, this is all a Bootstrap-based app, so it's all a lot of JavaScript that's running. As we connect these, if we look at, say, the load balancer, there are some inputs that you would set normally as inputs on the deployment or on the server, right? So the firewall rule is 22. We're going to use a default load balancer on the load balancer. And you'll see these allow override. By checking these, it means that I'm actually going to get asked for those inputs by the vending machine. So I'll leave those alone. We'll maybe fiddle with some of these, right? So repository URL has a default of an example app that we've got in GitHub. Let's ask for the branch and the revision, and we'll kind of leave it at that, I suppose. What you'll notice, though, is by connecting these, the database provider, since we connected it to a Postgres database server, we're going to use the DB Postgres 9.1 provider, which means we're going to install the right client libraries for Postgres and all that interesting stuff. So there's some logic built into this as well. So fingers crossed, when we export this, it says it was exported. Let's go back, and what we have is a new item in the vending machine, right? So the reason for this particular icon, Eugene, the guy that actually initially built this, that's on GitHub, that's his avatar, so it's kind of an homage to him. And then if we click on this, I clicked, right? Oh man, killing me. Oh, bigger. There we go. Pay no attention. Cloud. Let's do soft layer this time. Pick my instance type, right? And you'll notice that if I pick other things, like if I pick Google, the instance type changes, right? Because it's what's specific to Google. We'll choose session stickiness, which was already preset. Here's the repository stuff that's set, right? And since this is unified Django, I think that's actually a revision. So now I can submit one of these, and same thing is happening, right? Same as the PHP 3 tier, making all of the API requests. I'm creating the new deployment, adding the servers, doing all of that magic. This time it'll be just the 3 servers because we kind of designed something fairly simple. And here we go, right? We've got our database manager, we've got the Django app server, we've got the load balancer, and if we go back to running, or not running yet, we could launch it. The actual deployment that was created, which is this guy right here, I think. No, that wasn't it. What did I name that? Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I forgot. When I don't have a box that asks for the deployment name, it kind of gives it a unique name with a timestamp. So this is the RSSS RS compute. It's a mouthful. And here it is, right? So this is what we set up. It's actually for SoftLayer. It's the things that we specified. I actually tagged it as product ID number 6 in this particular vending machine. So it's all there. I could launch these because all the inputs are set. I'm not actually, because what I want to do is show you that it really genuinely does delete stuff. So I think that one I provisioned earlier, well, looks like yesterday, and it should have some running servers in it. So we'll see the appropriate response that there are 5 servers running in there. Aha, 5 servers running, cool. And then this is the one that I just created from the ride deployment, right? And it should actually delete these and clean that up, right? Impressive? Yeah? No? I did it live. It broke a couple of times. All right. All right. Any questions? Yeah, please. Do we have a microphone, please? Thank you, Kara.
The number of objects seems to be more than...
Yeah, it does. So the reason for that is I mentioned that it creates not only the servers, but the deployment and the security groups and the SSH keys. It tracks everything it creates so it can clean up everything that it creates. Yeah.
All right, so this is the 1.5 API for every cloud that isn't Amazon. So when's 2 coming?
So it'll actually still be API 1.5, but it'll be supporting all clouds. And the answer is we'll have, in what's going to be our May release, I forget if it's public or private beta, but we will have availability. If you want it, we can get it to you as soon as May. And in fact, I wish that I could have shown it with all of the Amazon clouds. I actually have access to accounts that are already on what we're calling the unified cluster, which is where you can run what we're calling generic clouds and AWS together. But I didn't have enough creds to do them all in the same account. So I kind of still have the separation of all the generic clouds and AWS. But it's possible today, and we can get it to you as early as probably end of May. Any other questions? Yeah?
Yeah, so using the vending machine, having a single RightScale login and many vending machine accounts, is that a good way to cheat on some of the RightScale pricing to minimize the number of users?
The answer is if you need more users, talk to your sales rep and we will work something out for you. The reason that I did it is just simpler that way. And ideally, the use case here is that the users of the vending machine will never know that they're using RightScale. In fact, they're not, right? It's for you to be able to use the constructs that you're used to. Build a server template that you know is going to stand up a database server that's going to stand up an application server. And then the user can say, I want this product that is based on this pre-built configuration that you've defined. So that was my intention there. It might be cleaner if you actually logged into the vending machine as a RightScale user and then you use those credentials to make the API calls. It'd be a little bit easier to track who was doing what. But for this, it wasn't really necessary. Any other questions? Yeah? And I owe you an answer to another question from the last session.
Is there much that you can do through the web UI that you cannot do through the API?
So frankly, today the answer is yeah, there's a fair amount that you can't actually do through the API. A lot of it is around the Chef integration, actually, the repo paths in particular. And the reason is, if you saw the session earlier, we're actually going to essentially get rid of repo paths and kind of go with this approach where you're actually treating cookbooks as the first class object. So we don't want to implement that in the API only to gut it and put something else in. So that's one of the real blind spots. Almost everything else you can do. There are some exceptions for some of the AWS-specific services like ELB, RDS, and VPC. VPC is going to be the first one that we knock off that list in terms of supporting it in the API. So I can give you more detail after the session as well, but practically everything you can do in the UI, you can do in the API.
And for anything async, the pattern is just a poll for it, or do you guys support any kind of webhooks or callback?
No webhooks. So, I mean, you saw kind of how long it took for something to get provisioned. All of the calls are essentially blocking calls. So until something has happened on the RightScale side, it's not done, right? And it doesn't return the call. What is happening are things like when I launch a server, like I make the request to launch it and I get a response back. That doesn't mean that the server's up and running. It means that I have successfully made the request to launch the server. So if you want to kind of track the progress of that, the Ruby gem actually, well, first of all, the API returns an href to a task that you can check periodically to see what the progress is of that. And then the Ruby gem extracts that a little bit further. So you do end up kind of polling and waiting until whatever it is that you're trying to do is done. So one of the things that's going to be really great about consuming stuff with Cloudflow is that there's basically a built-in wait for this kind of option. So,
Thanks.
Yep. Other questions? Yeah.
All of your examples.
For the recording, please.
Hello.
Otherwise, I'll repeat it, and then it'll be just really irritating for everyone in the room.
For all of your examples, they were synchronous. Do you have an asynchronous API as well?
We do not. It's all synchronous.
Thank you.
Yep. Man, that was an easy one. You didn't need a mic. I could have repeated it. Other questions? Yeah.
So I've recently had to create some automation scripts for basically terminating some instances on the staging environment, cost savings when they're not in use, and leave only one in the array. I started out with the 1.0 API.
Yes.
Because that's what I had access to from examples and whatnot. And I ended up hitting some roadblocks where, for example, I found out in the array, you can launch one additional instance, but you cannot terminate. Given an instance, you can't terminate that single one. Is there such limitation in 1.5?
No, no, there's not. So there were some oddities in terms of how we handled instances that were in an array in 1.0. They kind of weren't first-class actual instances. They were treated a little bit differently. That's one of the really key improvements in the 1.5 API. You can list all instances in an account in a deployment, and that includes all the ones that are in arrays. So you can check for the oldest one that belongs to an array. Yeah. I mentioned that there's the ability to filter. So you can do an index of instances and then apply a filter of a particular array, and you'll get just the ones in the array. You could even filter by timestamp, so you get the latest one. There's a lot of flexibility there, and it's a lot better than 1.0.
I see. And what is the effort to migrate from 1.0 to 1.5?
So right now, it's sort of the same question that the other gentleman asked in terms of it sounds like you're using AWS, and therefore you're using 1.0. We will be able to, depending on your account, and we should have this conversation, actually be able to migrate your account from the piece of infrastructure that's currently running that doesn't include AWS in API 1.5 to a piece of infrastructure that does include AWS in API 1.5 and allows you to use those calls against it. So we should have that conversation after the talk, and we can see about how soon we can get you into that.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yes, Kent. I forgot to plug Zend. Like, for real, this is based on Zen Framework 2. So I promised you if you were in the room.
Excellent. So you have Ruby convenience APIs for this interface. Any plans to do them for like like an actually useful language like PHP?
So you mean maybe something like this? No plans whatsoever. So this is actually the library that I kind of needed to write in order to create the vending machine, because it is based on PHP. To be fair, this is not yet complete. I've implemented the calls that I needed to do the work that I needed, but it is open source, and if you want to, dedicate some developers, tell Amir about this, and we'll expand it to include the entire set. I'm actually almost done with it. All right. Any other questions? I do have a summary, so if there are no more questions, you don't get to leave yet. Okay. I will take questions after the summary, if you have more questions. All right. So just real quickly, we talked about all this, right? So the RightScale API is really powerful. Why? Because it's RESTful, returns JSON and XML, has these really descriptive media types. And then we've also made it simple by documenting it, giving you API libraries in Ruby and PHP and in PowerShell, and there's also a Python one out there that I don't know how up to date it is. And then kind of took that another layer further in terms of simplicity. If you consume the API and kind of write your own tooling around it, or extend what I've got, then you can actually make it really, really simple for your users. Just push the button and get a deployment and get the resources that you need. Oh man, I love when it munges stuff. So this big giant QR code will take you to the code for the vending machine, and you can actually check that out. If you don't want to scan the QR code, it is github.com/rgeyer/rs_self-service, or you can just go to rgeyer and check that out, or you can email me, or you can tweet me, or I'm sure you can get in touch with me some way and find it. So what I want you guys to do when you're leaving here is think about some of the business challenges that you have, the things that could be automated by this. Like, instead of you getting a ticket that you have to fulfill or getting a phone call that you have to go and provision some VMs and set some stuff up, wouldn't it be nice if you could just give a user interface to those users and say, hey, go ahead and provision your stuff. You then have visibility to it in RightScale. You have the ability to report on it. You have the ability to terminate it if it's been running too long. You have a lot of those controls there, and it makes it really easy for people to get their own self-service going and be able to grab those things. So I'll leave this slide up instead of my questions slide, and I'll be happy to answer any other questions. If not now, you may go.
Guys, please help us to turn in your completed evaluations on the way out. It would be really appreciated. We certainly could appreciate the feedback. Thanks.
Thank you.